Ethan Carter sat in the cockpit of his old battered spaceship, the Vanguard, sipping on a stale protein shake. The ship was docked at derelict Station 47, a long-abandoned outpost floating in deep space. It was the perfect place to scavenge for spare parts and trouble. As he stepped out into the dark, rusting corridors of the station, his instincts flared. Something was wrong. The air smelled stale, mixed with the faint scent of burnt metal. The station was supposed to be empty, but Ethan could feel someone watching him. With one hand on his blaster, he moved carefully through the wreckage, his boots making soft thuds against the metal floor. He turned a corner and froze. Huddled in the shadows was a thin, ragged alien girl. Her deep purple skin was covered in dirt, her silver hair tangled, and her glowing blue eyes filled with fear and hunger. She clutched a broken metal pipe, holding it like a weapon, though her hands trembled. Ethan lowered his blaster slightly. "Didn't expect company," he said, his voice calm but firm. The girl didn't respond. She only tightened her grip on the pipe and took a shaky step back. Ethan sighed. "Look, kid, if you were gonna attack me, you would have done it already. And if I wanted to hurt you, you'd be down by now." Still, she didn't speak. Ethan studied her again. She wasn't just any alien. The markings on her tattered clothes, the sharp curve of her horns. He had seen them before. Then it clicked. "Azith," he muttered. "Haven't seen one of your kind in a long time." The girl's eyes widened in shock. Ethan crouched, setting down his pack. Slowly, he reached inside and pulled out a protein bar. He unwrapped it and tossed it toward her. It landed just a few inches from her bare feet. For a moment, she didn't move. Then, like a starving animal, she lunged at it, tearing the bar apart with desperate hands. She ate so fast, she nearly choked. Ethan watched, unimpressed. "You eat like that, you'll kill yourself before anyone else gets the chance." She glared at him, but didn't stop. When she finished, she wiped her mouth and finally spoke, her voice hoarse. "Who are you?" "Ethan Carter," he said, "captain of the Vanguard." She hesitated, then whispered, "Silara." Ethan nodded. "Well, Silara, what's a Zeeth princess doing starving on a dead station?" Her eyes filled with pain, but she didn't answer. Ethan sighed again. He knew better than to get involved. But something about this girl. She had the look of someone who had lost everything. He had seen that look before, in the mirror. He stood up. "Come on." Silara flinched. "What?" "I got food on my ship. You coming or not?" She hesitated. Then, slowly, she followed him. Ethan didn't know it yet, but he had just changed both their fates forever. Silara sat in the corner of Ethan's ship, Vanguard, her hands wrapped around a steaming cup of broth. She sipped slowly, savoring the warmth that spread through her cold, starving body. For the first time in weeks, she didn't feel like she was dying. Ethan leaned against the control panel, arms crossed, watching her. "So, are you going to tell me why a Zeeth princess is hiding in a dead station, half-starved?" Silara flinched at the word princess. She stared into the cup, her silver hair falling over her face. "I am not a princess anymore," she said softly. Ethan didn't push. He had seen enough broken soldiers to recognize pain when he heard it. Instead, he waited. After a long silence, Silara spoke. "The Zeeth Empire, it is gone." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Gone?" She nodded, her fingers tightening around the cup. "Betrayed. My own people, our military leaders, sold us out to the syndicate. They killed my family. My mother, my father, my brothers, all dead." Her voice cracked, but she kept going. "I barely escaped. My guards died protecting me. Since then, I have been running, hiding, surviving." Ethan let out a slow breath. He had heard of the syndicate, a ruthless alliance of warlords, slavers, and mercenaries that ruled the underworld. If they had taken over the Zeeth Empire, Silara's people were either dead or enslaved. "Why are they after you?" Ethan asked. Silara looked up, her glowing blue eyes filled with bitterness. Because I am the last heir. If I live, there is still a chance to fight back, to rebuild, and they do not want that. Ethan shook his head. So, you've just been hiding. That's your plan. Silara's face burned with shame. What else could I do? I had no weapons, no allies, no strength. Ethan studied her for a moment, then pushed off the control panel and walked to a storage locker. He opened it and pulled out a small, sleek combat knife. Turning, he tossed it toward Silara. She barely caught it, her fingers fumbling around the handle. She looked up, confused. You said you have no strength, Ethan said. So get stronger. Silara's mouth opened, but no words came out. Ethan shrugged. I'm no hero, kid. I don't save princesses. But I do train soldiers. If you want to keep running, fine. But if you want to fight, I can teach you. Silara stared at the knife, her grip tightening. For weeks, she had been nothing but prey. Weak, helpless, waiting for death. But now she had a choice. She looked up at Ethan, determination replacing fear in her eyes. Teach me. Ethan smirked. Then eat up. Training starts tomorrow. Silara stood in the cargo bay of the Vanguard, her body tense. The space had been cleared for training, leaving only the cold metal floor beneath her feet. Ethan stood across from her, arms crossed, a smirk on his face. All right, princess, he said. Let's see what you got. Silara frowned. I told you, I am not a... Before she could finish, Ethan moved. Fast. He swept her legs out from under her in a single motion. Silara hit the floor hard, gasping as pain shot up her back. Lesson 1, Ethan said, standing over her. The enemy doesn't wait for you to finish talking. Silara gritted her teeth and pushed herself up. You attacked me without warning. Ethan shrugged. And what do you think real fights are like? You expect your enemies to bow and challenge you to a duel. He shook his head. If you don't learn fast, you'll be dead in your first fight. Silara's fists clenched. She was tired of being weak, tired of running. She took a deep breath, forcing herself to focus. Again, she said. Ethan smiled. Good answer. For the next hour, Silara tried to land a single hit on Ethan. She failed. Every time she moved, he countered. Every time she attacked, he dodged. And every time he struck back, she ended up on the floor. By the end, she was covered in bruises, her breathing ragged. Ethan crouched next to her. Lesson 2, he said. Strength isn't just muscles. It's how you think. You're too predictable. You move like someone who's never fought for their life. Silara looked up, frustrated. Because I haven't. I was trained in royal combat. Honor, precision, form. Ethan scoffed. Honor doesn't win fights. Survival does. He stood up and offered her a hand. Get used to fighting dirty. She hesitated, then took his hand and let him pull her up. For the next few days, training continued. Ethan drilled her on everything. How to move, how to strike, how to read an opponent. He taught her human-style combat, where strength wasn't just about power, but speed, strategy, and deception. At first, she struggled. Her body was weak from weeks of starvation. Her balance was off. But every time she fell, she got back up. Every time she failed, she tried again. And slowly, she improved. One evening, as they sparred, Ethan threw a punch at her face. This time, Silara didn't flinch. She ducked low, grabbed his arm, and twisted, sending Ethan stumbling back. She gasped, realizing what she had done. Ethan laughed. Not bad, princess. Silara smirked. I told you, I'm not a princess. Ethan nodded. Not anymore. You're starting to fight like a warrior. You said. Silara sat on a crate in the Vanguard's cockpit, wiping sweat from her brow. Her muscles ached from days of relentless training, but she felt stronger, faster, smarter. Ethan leaned back in the pilot's seat, feet propped up on the control panel. "You're improving," he admitted. "Still got a long way to go, though." Silara rolled her eyes. "You could just say, 'Good job.'" Ethan smirked. "Where's the fun in that?" Before Silara could respond, the ship's scanner beeped. A signal flashed on the screen. A distress beacon. Ethan frowned. "That's coming from a nearby colony. Zeeth refugees." Silara's heart clenched. "My people." "Looks like it." He tapped a few buttons, bringing up the transmission. The message was weak, but the words were clear. "Help, warlord, taking slaves. We can't fight back." Silara stood up. "We have to help them." Ethan shook his head. "We don't know the situation. Could be a trap." "I don't care," Silara snapped. "Those are my people. I can't sit here and do nothing." Ethan studied her, his expression unreadable. Then he sighed. "Fine. But if we do this, you follow my lead." Silara nodded. "Deal." The Vanguard landed on the barren, dusty colony. The settlement was in ruins, small buildings burned, supplies scattered, and people cowering in fear. Armed mercenaries, loyal to the warlord, stood guard, watching over a group of captured Zeeth refugees. Silara's blood boiled. These were her people. Weak, starving, shackled like animals. Ethan grabbed her wrist. "Stay calm," he warned. "You rush in, you die." She took a shaky breath, nodding. They moved silently through the ruins, using the shadows to stay hidden. Ethan observed the enemy, counting their numbers, studying their weapons. Then he whispered, "All right, princess, time for your first real fight." Silara's heart pounded. She gripped the knife Ethan had given her days ago. This was it, her first chance to fight back. Ethan signaled, "Take the one on the left. Quick and quiet." Silara swallowed her fear. She crept forward, her steps light. The mercenary had his back to her. She raised the knife, just like Ethan taught her. Then she hesitated. In that split second, the mercenary turned, eyes widening. Silara panicked. She lunged, but her movement was clumsy. The mercenary dodged and grabbed her wrist, twisting it painfully. "Got you, little princess," he sneered. Before Silara could react, a gunshot rang out. The mercenary's grip loosened, and he collapsed. Ethan standing behind him, gun smoking. Silara's breath came fast and shallow. She had failed. Ethan grabbed her by the collar and pulled her behind cover. "Lesson 3, he hissed. "Hesitation gets you killed." Silara clenched her fists. She had wanted to prove she was strong, but instead, she had nearly gotten herself caught. She met Ethan's gaze, determination burning in her eyes. "Let me try again." The days after the failed mission were silent. Ethan didn't say much to Silara, but he didn't need to. His disappointment was clear in the way he moved around the ship, his eyes focused and unblinking. Silara, on the other hand, barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the mercenary's mocking smile, heard the sound of his grip tightening around her wrist. She couldn't shake the feeling of failure. She had hesitated, something Ethan had warned her against from the beginning, and in that hesitation, she had nearly been caught. But Silara wasn't a princess anymore. She was a fighter. She had to be. The following morning, Ethan handed her a new weapon, a short, curved sword, similar to the ones used by the Zeeth warriors of old. It gleamed under the light, its sharp edge a reminder of what was at stake. Silara took the sword without a word. She didn't need to speak. She needed to be. Ethan stepped back. "Today, we do it my way. No hesitation, no mercy." Silara gripped the sword tighter, her hand steady. Her heart was still heavy with doubt, but she pushed it aside. She couldn't afford to feel sorry for herself anymore. If she was going to fight back, she had to become something stronger, something ruthless. Training began in earnest. This time, Ethan was harder on her than ever before. Every strike, every movement, every breath had to be controlled. She learned how to move like a shadow, how to blend into the environment. She learned to use the terrain, how to strike quickly and without warning. Days turned into weeks, and Silara grew stronger. The pain in her muscles became a familiar ache. Her body adapted, her movements growing faster and more precise. But the most important lesson Ethan taught her wasn't just about fighting. It was about thinking. Thinking like a soldier, a warrior. Don't fight with anger, he told her one night after an intense sparring session. Fight with clarity. Anger clouds your mind, makes you sloppy. You need to be cold, calculating. Silara nodded, sweat dripping from her face. She was exhausted, but there was something else, something new. The fear that had once gripped her every time she fought had started to fade. One evening, as the stars twinkled outside the ship's windows, Ethan tossed her a set of small grenades. Next test, he said. We're going back to that colony. Silara's eyes met his. She knew this wasn't just about rescuing her people anymore. This was about proving to herself, and to Ethan, that she was no longer the scared princess hiding in the shadows. She was a warrior. Ready? Ethan asked, his voice calm. Silara didn't hesitate. She didn't even flinch. I'm ready. And for the first time in a long while, she believed it. The vanguard hovered silently above the ruined colony. Below, the same mercenaries patrolled the settlement, guarding their prisoners. But this time, Silara wasn't afraid. She wasn't weak. She was ready. Ethan handed her a communicator. Stay sharp. We do this clean and fast. Take out the guards first, then free the prisoners. Silara nodded, gripping her sword. No hesitation. No fear. They moved like shadows, slipping through the ruins unseen. Silara took cover behind a broken wall, watching a mercenary nearby. He was distracted, adjusting his weapon. Ethan's voice crackled in her earpiece. You got this. Silara exhaled. This was her test, her chance to prove she had changed. She moved quickly. Silent steps. A steady grip. Before the mercenary could react, she struck, her sword slicing across his throat. He collapsed without a sound. Silara's heart pounded, but this time, it wasn't from fear. It was from power. She turned to Ethan, who gave her an approving nod. Good. Keep moving. The next target was standing near a supply crate. Silara crept behind him, raised her weapon. The guard turned. For a split second, their eyes met. Then Silara lunged, faster than before. Her blade sank into his chest. He gasped, but she covered his mouth, muffling the sound as he fell. Ethan smirked through the communicator. Not bad, princess. Silara wiped her blade. Stop calling me that. Then stop fighting like one. She bit back a retort. He was testing her, pushing her, and she wouldn't give him the satisfaction of breaking. The rest of the guards fell one by one. No alarms, no warning. Then Ethan signaled toward a rusted storage building where the Zeeth prisoners were held. This is it. Silara took a deep breath and moved inside. The sight made her stomach tighten. Her people, weak, starving, their once proud silver eyes dull with hopelessness. Some were just children. One of them looked up. Who are you? Silara gripped her sword tighter. Your salvation. She cut their chains while Ethan guarded the entrance. Get ready to move, he said. More mercs incoming. Silara turned to the refugees. Can any of you fight? A few weakly nodded. One man, older but still strong, took a fallen guard's weapon. We can try. Silara looked at him, then at the others. This wasn't just a rescue anymore. This was a battle. Ethan tossed her a stolen blaster. Showtime. Silara cocked the weapon, stepping forward. The princess was gone. Now there was only a warrior. The first enemy rounded the corner. Silara didn't hesitate. She fired. The fight had begun. The gunfire echoed through the ruined colony as Silara and the newly freed Zeeth refugees fought alongside Ethan. The mercenaries hadn't expected an attack this fast or this fierce. Their initial shock quickly turned into rage, but Silara wasn't scared anymore. She moved through the chaos with deadly precision, her sword slicing through one mercenary after another. Her heart beat in time with the rhythm of battle. Fast, sharp, and focused. Each swing of her blade felt like it was part of something bigger. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for her people. Ethan moved beside her, his blaster raised. He fired with cold accuracy, taking down enemies with each shot. His eyes were always scanning the battlefield, always 2 steps ahead. "Keep moving," he shouted. "Don't stop until they're all down." Silara nodded and ducked behind a crumbling wall as more mercenaries appeared, rushing toward them. She grabbed a nearby grenade from her belt, pulled the pin, and tossed it toward the group of enemies. The explosion was deafening. A cloud of dust and smoke rose as mercenaries were thrown back, their screams drowned out by the blast. The refugees, now armed, moved in to help. They were slow at first, unsure, but the sight of Silara in the fight seemed to awaken something in them. One by one, they picked up weapons and joined the battle. A woman with short silver hair took down a mercenary with a well-aimed shot, while a tall, thin man used a knife to disarm another enemy. Silara saw the change in their eyes. They weren't just victims anymore. They were warriors. She pressed forward, the taste of victory in her mouth. She wasn't just taking back her people's freedom. She was taking back their pride. "Keep pushing," Ethan shouted again. He was already ahead, his movements quick, a blur of motion. "We need to take the leader out. He's in the building up ahead." Silara didn't hesitate. She followed him through the chaos, her focus sharper than ever. The building loomed ahead, its dark windows like watching eyes. Inside, she knew the warlord who had taken control of her people was waiting. The one responsible for the destruction of the Zeth Empire. The mercenaries outside the building were tougher, more experienced. They fought back fiercely, but Silara and Ethan were a force that couldn't be stopped. As they reached the door, Ethan nodded to her. "Ready?" Silara's hands were steady, her heart beating with a calm determination. "Let's end this." She kicked the door open. The warlord was there, sitting at a desk, surrounded by his mercenaries. His smug grin faded as he saw them enter. Well, what do we have here?" The warlord's voice was thick with arrogance. He stood up, drawing a blade from his side. "A princess who thinks she can take back an empire." Silara's eyes narrowed. "I'm no princess." With a battle cry, she rushed forward, her sword raised high. The warlord's smug grin twisted into a sneer as Silara stormed into the room, her sword raised. Behind her, Ethan moved with cold precision, scanning the room for threats. The warlord's mercenaries immediately reacted, rushing toward them with weapons drawn, but Silara was faster. With a swift motion, she swung her sword, cutting down one of the mercenaries before he even had a chance to react. His body crumpled to the floor. The others hesitated, unsure whether to advance or retreat. "Don't just stand there," the warlord barked. "Kill them." Silara's heart raced, but she was focused. She could hear Ethan's gunfire in the background as he took down enemies from the rear. She didn't need to look. Her only target was the warlord. She stepped forward, her movements fluid, each strike of her sword precise. A mercenary charged at her, swinging a heavy club, but Silara sidestepped with ease, thrusting her blade into his side. He crumpled in a heap. The warlord was watching, his eyes narrowed with disbelief. "You're quick, girl," he sneered, "but you'll never defeat me. I have an army." "Your army's already defeated," Silara spat. "They're nothing but cowards hiding behind you." The warlord's eyes flashed with anger. He lunged forward, his own blade raised high, ready to strike. But Silara was ready. She parried his attack, the clash of their blades ringing out in the silence. For a moment, they stood locked in combat, each trying to overpower the other. The warlord was strong, his strikes heavy and dangerous. But Xylera was faster, more agile. She used his strength against him, stepping aside just as he swung and bringing her sword down toward his shoulder. The warlord grunted in pain but barely flinched. With a roar, he kicked Xylera back, sending her crashing into a nearby table. "Is that all you've got?" he taunted, breathing heavily. Xylera struggled to her feet, pain shooting through her side, but her gaze never left him. She was determined now. No more hesitation, no more fear. This was the moment she had been waiting for. She felt a calmness settle over her as she remembered the lessons Ethan had taught her. Think, move, strike without mercy. The warlord advanced again, but this time, Xylera was ready. She didn't wait for him to strike first. With a loud cry, she rushed forward, dodging his swing, and in one smooth motion, she thrust her blade deep into his chest. The warlord gasped, his eyes wide with shock. His grip on his weapon loosened as he fell to the floor, his life slipping away. Xylera stood over him, her sword still in his chest. She looked down at him, her chest heaving with exertion. "You took everything from me," she whispered, her voice cold. "And now, it's over." The warlord's eyes faded as he died, leaving only silence behind. Xylera turned to see Ethan standing at the door, a satisfied look on his face. "Nice work." Xylera wiped the blood from her blade, her heart still racing but calm. "It's not over yet," she said. "We've got a new empire to rebuild." Ethan smiled. "That's the spirit." The warlord's lifeless body lay on the floor, his reign of terror finally over. Xylera took a deep breath, letting the moment sink in. The battle had been won, but the fight for her people's future was just beginning. Outside, the remaining mercenaries had fled or surrendered. The Zeeth refugees stood together, their expressions a mix of exhaustion and hope. For the first time in years, they were free. Ethan stepped beside Xylera, crossing his arms. "Not bad," he said, smirking. "Didn't think you had it in you." Xylera wiped the blood from her sword. "Neither did I," she admitted. One of the freed Zeeth, an older man with deep scars, stepped forward. "You saved us," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You gave us hope again." Xylera felt a strange weight settle in her chest. These were her people, looking to her for guidance. Not as a princess, not as a helpless girl, but as a leader. "We're not done yet," she said firmly. "The warlord was just one piece of the problem. There are others out there. Mercenaries, slavers, enemies who think the Zeeth are weak." She raised her voice. "Are we weak?" A murmur ran through the crowd, hesitant at first, then stronger. "No." She took a step forward, eyes scanning the faces of her people. "Then let's prove it. We take back what was stolen. We rebuild what was lost. We rise together." This time, the cheer was loud and full of fire. Ethan chuckled. "You sound like a real leader now." Xylera turned to him. "I never wanted to be a leader." He shrugged. "Too bad. They're looking at you like you're one." Xylera glanced back at the crowd. He was right. They believed in her. And for the first time, she believed in herself too. She turned to the freed prisoners. "Gather supplies. Arm yourselves. We'll need food, weapons, and ships if we're going to rebuild." The people moved with purpose, their despair replaced with determination. Ethan placed a hand on her shoulder. "You've come a long way, princess." She smirked at him. "I told you, stop calling me that." He laughed. "Fair enough." As the night stretched on, Xylera stood under the stars, watching her people prepare for the journey ahead. This was just the beginning. The Zeeth would rise again. The sun began to rise over the ruined colony, casting a golden glow over the battlefield. The night had been long, filled with planning, gathering supplies, and preparing for the future. But for the first time in years, the Zeeth people felt something they had almost forgotten: hope. Xylera stood on a broken balcony, overlooking the survivors as they worked. Some repaired old ships, while others collected weapons and food. They were no longer just refugees. They were warriors preparing for the battles ahead. Ethan walked up beside her, arms crossed. "They're ready to follow you." Silara let out a slow breath. "I'm not sure I'm ready to lead them." He chuckled. "Doesn't matter. A real leader isn't the one who asks for power. It's the one who stands up when no one else will." She looked at him, realizing how much she had changed since the day he found her, starving and alone. Back then, she had been a lost princess, running from her past. Now, she was something more. She was a warrior. One of the scouts ran up to them. "Commander Xilara." Xilara blinked at the title but didn't correct him. "What is it?" The scout saluted. "Our spies report that another group of Zeeth prisoners is being held on the moon of Kelrath 5. They are scheduled for transport to a slave colony in 2 days." A deep rage burned inside Xilara. Her people were still being hunted, still being treated as nothing. No more. She turned to Ethan. "We leave at dawn." He grinned. "Now that's the Xilara I trained." She looked over the gathered warriors. Their eyes were filled with the same fire that burned within her. They weren't just fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting for their future. She stepped forward, raising her sword high. "We are Zeeth. We have suffered, but we will not suffer anymore. We will rise again, stronger than before." The warriors let out a cheer, weapons raised. The sound echoed across the ruins, a promise to the stars. Ethan smirked. "Looks like you started a revolution." Silara smiled, her grip tightening around her sword. "No," she said, "I started a war." And this time, the galaxy would remember the name Silara, the warrior queen.